In 40 years of family therapy, I sometimes asked adult children, the ones who had pulled away, what they wished their parents understood. The answers were almost always the same, and almost always things the parent had no idea about. Not anger, not bitterness, not even resentment in most cases. Something quieter, something that had been there for a long time, waiting for a conversation that never quite arrived. Today I want to share what that is. Not as a verdict on any parent, not as a list of failings, but as a map of the specific interior that adult children carry but rarely find a way to show. And stay with me, because in the second half of this video, I want to share something that surprised even me. What happens in the room when an adult child finally says these things out loud to their parent for the first time? A quick note, this video is educational psychology, not personal therapy. Whatever you hear today, please consider speaking with a licensed family therapist before acting on it. Let me begin with someone I worked with. I'll call him Thomas. He was 69 years old, warm, earnest, the kind of man who showed up to everything and meant well at every single turn. He had one daughter, Ashley, 38 years old. She called twice a year, always polite, never warm. The calls lasted about 12 minutes. Thomas had a theory about why. He thought it was about his remarriage 7 years ago. He thought Ashley had never forgiven him for the timing. When I eventually worked with Ashley separately, I asked her, "Is it about the remarriage?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "That's what he thinks it's about. No, it's not about the remarriage." What Ashley said next, over several sessions, became one of the clearest examples I ever encountered of the thing I want to map for you today. There are 4 things I hear adult children say when they finally say them. Not always in these words, but in these patterns, reliably, across very different families and very different histories. The first, and the one most parents are completely unprepared for, is this: "I felt like your feelings were always more important than mine." Not that the parent was selfish in the ordinary sense. Often the parent was enormously giving: time, money, presence, sacrifice. But the emotional atmosphere of the home said, "My anxiety, my disappointment, my approval or disapproval is the weather you live inside." The child learned early to monitor the parent's emotional state, to manage it, to keep the atmosphere stable. That is a very large job for a small person, and it doesn't end when the child grows up. Ashley said, "I spent my whole childhood making sure he was okay, making sure my feelings didn't add to his load. And then I realized I had been doing it for 30 years, and I didn't know how to stop." Joshua Coleman, a psychologist who has spent decades working with estranged families, calls this emotional parentification when a child takes on the role of emotional caretaker for a parent, not through cruelty, through need. The adult child who grew up as an emotional caretaker does not pull away out of indifference. They pull away because closeness with that parent still requires them to perform a role they are exhausted by. The second thing adult children say, and this one is often the most difficult for parents to believe, is, "I never felt like I could disappoint you and survive it." This is almost never about punishment in the traditional sense. Most of these parents never raised a hand. Many never even raised their voice. What they communicated, through expressions, through silences, through the specific quality of their attention, was that disappointment was something the child could not afford to cause. It changed the air in the room. Sue Johnson's attachment research found that what children need, above almost everything else, is to know that their emotional reality, including failure and disappointment, will be received without the relationship being at risk. When a child grows up in an atmosphere where disappointment feels dangerous, even if nothing dramatic ever happened, they learn to manage the parent's expectations rather than share their own experience. And that management costs something over 30 years. Ashley said, "I spent years curating what I told him. Good news was safe, struggles were not. I became a highlights reel, and eventually I got tired of performing the highlights reel for an audience of one." The third thing, and this one is the one most often left completely unsaid, is, "I needed you to ask about me, not to tell me about you." This is the one that most surprised parents when they heard it, not because they were intentionally self-focused, but because they did not realize how consistently the balance had tipped. Thomas, when I described this pattern to him, said immediately, "But I always asked how she was doing." And he did. He always opened the call with, "How are you, Ashley?" Ashley's experience of those calls was different. She said, he'd ask how I was, I'd say fine, and then he'd spend the next 10 minutes telling me about his week, and I'd realize he didn't actually want to know, he wanted to connect. And connecting, for him, meant talking. That gap between what Thomas intended and what Ashley experienced is one of the most common gaps in parent-adult-child relationships, and it is almost entirely invisible to the parent. The fourth thing, and this is the one that carries the most weight and the most grief, is simply, I didn't feel like you saw me. The real me, not the version of me you needed me to be. This is not a statement about love. Most adult children who carry this know, intellectually, that their parent loves them. What they are describing is something different, the feeling of being visible but not truly seen. Visible but not truly seen. There is a difference between a parent who knows their child's history and a parent who knows their child's interior. Many parents have the first and assume it is the second. Bowen's family systems research found that the degree to which a parent can differentiate their own needs from their child's experience, can see the child as a separate self rather than an extension of themselves, is one of the strongest predictors of closeness in the adult relationship. Ashley said, he knew everything about my life, where I worked, what I ate, who I was dating, but he didn't know what I was afraid of, what I regretted, what I was proud of that had nothing to do with him. He knew my facts. He didn't know me. He knew my facts, he didn't know me. That sentence, in different words, is the one I heard most often. Now, let me come to the thing I promised. What happens in the room when an adult child finally says these things to their parent for the first time? I expected, and most parents I worked with expected, that it would be painful. A confrontation, an accounting. But the parents who could hear it, who could stay present without defending or collapsing, almost always described the same thing. They said, it felt like meeting my child for the first time, like something that had always been in the room had finally been let out of it. Thomas and Ashley eventually had that conversation. Not easily, not quickly, over 3 sessions, with considerable silence and considerable courage from both of them. Thomas said in one of the hardest sentences I have heard a parent say, I didn't know I was doing any of that. I thought I was loving her. I was, but I was also making it very hard for her to let me in. I was loving her, but I was also making it very hard for her to let me in. That is one of the truest sentences I have ever heard in a therapy room. I want to say something directly to any parent watching this. Not as a verdict, not as an indictment, as something I believe you deserve to hear. If your adult child is distant, and you don't know why, the most important thing you can do is not to explain yourself, not to remind them of your love, not to wait for them to come to you. It is to ask. Genuinely, without needing a particular answer, without managing what they say, to ask. What has it been like for you? Not in our relationship, in your life. What do I not know about you that you wish I did? Not as an opening to a conversation about the relationship, just as an expression of genuine curiosity about them. What is your life actually like? What do you carry that I don't see? Ashley, months after her conversations with Thomas, said something that stayed with me. She said, he finally asked me what I was afraid of, and I realized I had been waiting my whole life for that question. Before we close, I want to leave you with one question to carry this week, not to answer for your child, for yourself. Is there something about my adult child, their inner life, their fears, their private experience that I genuinely don't know? And if there is, what is stopping me from asking? If this video helped you see something you couldn't see before, I'd ask 3 small things. Hit the like button. It tells YouTube to show this to other parents who are carrying the same question and don't yet know what they're not seeing. Subscribe to this channel. We come here to understand the patterns in family life that are hardest to see from inside them. One conversation at a time. And in the comments, tell me one thing. If you are a parent, is there something about your adult child you realize you don't know? And if you are an adult child, is there something you have been waiting for a parent to ask? I read every one. I'm Dr. Henry. The door between a parent and an adult child is almost never locked. It is almost always just waiting for someone to ask the right question. Take care of yourself, and take care of the people who matter to you. I'll see you in the next one.